Hello, everyone. This is the base series pre-recorded substitution lecture from Monday. That would be February, I don't know actually, but Monday class that, for the week when I'll be away for conference. So I hope you can sleep in a little bit and you can watch this video whenever you have a time so we can keep learning. In this video, we're going to talk about what is called psychologically deep experiences, which is PDE. Now, these are the experiences that are special, out of ordinary, or meaningful. So they're not really common experiences, okay? And they're characterized by typically altered perception of time, self, surroundings. And we're going to get into what these things means for each of the different types of PDE. Now, once again, by definition, PDEs are rare. It's not common. Okay, it doesn't happen every hour, every day, and they're not always in leisure. As in, it happens in leisure, but it's not limited to leisure. It could happen in work. It could happen in your studies. It could happen in a different aspect of your life. Okay, and so previously in RLS 100, if you took it, we only talked about flow. Flow is an example of PDE. Now here, we're going to expand on that. We're going to expand on the flow. We're going to expand on the different types of PDE in addition to flow. So we, the chapter as well, the textbook authors, as well as myself, instructor, we want you to be able to differentiate different types of PDE. Why? Because there are many people. Well, first of all, flow is not the only PDE for sure. That's reality. Secondly, there are many practitioners, which you will be too in the future, who love flow and only know about flow, to be honest. And they're all about flow. And if anything happens, if anything special happens, if your sense of time changes, then everybody goes like, oh, that's flow, great, great. No, not always. So we want you to be more advanced than that. We want you to have more advanced conceptual tools to examine different types of PDE so that you can facilitate, you can plan, you can facilitate different types of PDE, which can be actually very, very beneficial for different types of leisure, recreation, sports, tourism types of the services. Okay, so we'll begin with the flow though, what we already know. So I'm going to go very quickly. The person psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's the one who created a concept and discovered, quote unquote, discovered the phenomena of flow. Flow, according to him, is the best optimal experience characterized by absorption into activity. So you're just like, you're not seeing anything else. You're not thinking about anything else. And a sense of absolute control. You do the activity very well during flow, right? Athletes in sports, they call this flow as a zone, getting into the zone, so on and so forth. Of course, I have a picture of Kobe Bryant here because, well, he was my favorite basketball player when I was playing basketball, and he seems to get into the zone or flow quite often. Now, question is, have you had it? Have you had a flow? When? Where? How did that feel? Was it actually flow though? Because we're going to talk more than just a flow in this lecture. Now, this is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Unfortunately, it was last year, no, 2 years ago, I want to say, he passed away actually. Yes. So if you want to listen to him talking, and there's a TED Talk for free, so you can listen to him. And he talked about how flow is the secret or is the key to happiness. It's one of the best way to achieve happiness. Now, I question that, to be honest, because, well, scientific evidence doesn't necessarily support him. And we're going to talk about it. But if you want to listen to him, here's a video. Honestly, he's not necessarily the best speaker I've listened to. However, he was one of the most famous and influential psychologists of 20th and first 20 years of 21st century too. So if you listen to him, this is one of the few opportunities you can do so now. Now, the chapter, the textbook is really kind, and then they would provide the tables for conditions and characteristics and typical leisure activity where different types of PDE happen. And this is the one for flow. So there are, those three are the conditions of flow. And like RLS 100, it's important to know the difference between condition and characteristics. Conditions come before flow happens. Okay. When you meet these conditions, you tend to have a flow after, right after that. Okay. You have a clear goals, you have a match between your skill level and their activities challenge level above, average level. We're going to talk about that a little later. And then finally, having that immediate feedback as to how you're doing. Okay. These things leads to flow. Now, chapter talked about the second characteristic, arguably one of the most important one, matching skill and challenge. Okay, this was very important, specifically important for leisure compared to trying to have a flow in work or school. One of the hypothesis theory, the reason why here could be the fact that work and school tends to have maybe built-in challenge level by nature is quite high, right? The school, right? Coursework, they challenge you. They should challenge you for the most parts, right? Work, once again, well, depending on work too, but most of the work typically make you really busy, make you really challenged. You have to learn new skills and you have to work with the difficult people and so on and so forth. So there are some built-in challenge level that is quite high. So really, it's up to you to bring the skill level, and that's the only part. You have to bring the skill up to that challenge level. Versus leisure, we have a variety of activities, variety of experiences, right? Some relaxing activities, they don't have a challenge, to be honest. And that's good, to be honest, right? So to achieve flow in leisure, you got to work on a both skill and challenge to really match it up and to bring it at the high level. So maybe this is particularly important for leisure. Science suggests that, very important. Now, in terms of characteristics are the one that you observe when they happen. When during the flow, basically, they happen during flow, not before, during flow. Okay, so when you see them, these things, you are providing, let's say, sports program, and you see your clients, your kids are going through, let's say, seems to exhibit these characteristics, and then like, ooh, you're facilitating proper flow. Once again, though, flow is hypothetical construct. We don't know, like we cannot see it directly. So we basically assume by observing these characteristics that flow happen. Okay. Now, once again, we covered them all in RLS 100, so I'm not going to go into it. Particularly, if you have any questions, let me know. Now, the second from bottom, being autotelic or intrinsically motivating, they're actually not quite the same thing. But that was actually in RLS 100, one of the conditions. Now, more recent research with the literature review, they found that actually they tend to be more happen during flow rather than before flow. So we're putting in here. You don't have to worry about it. It's just like that praise, that this factor, autotelic. Being autotelic means basically you have this tendency to feel intrinsically motivated for almost any activities. The type of people who enjoy even the most dullest, the dullest activities of all time, like, I don't know, folding clothes, ironing, those things. I don't particularly enjoy it, but some people just enjoy those things too. Those are the type of people we're talking about. Anyway, they seems to happen actually during flow based on some studies as well. You don't have to worry about that actually between conditions and characteristics. It's still debatable. The last one, heightened emotional intensity. Now, this is very important in relation to other PDEs we're going to talk about in a minute. Flow is more characterized by positive emotion, typically enjoyment, excitement, all those things as well. Okay. Now we're going to go through actually a couple of different flow models, and that's different things compared to RLS 102. We're going to go from actually the original model. Why? Because older versions of models actually does pretty good job in terms of explaining and suggesting the characteristics of flow. Okay, so this one is the original model, 1975 model. And this model shows how flow is dynamic. The fact that we cannot stay in flow zone too long, and I'll explain why. So in this model, the diagonal, this line, in the middle, look at my hands, right? That part is a flow. It was in this 1975 model, right? We cannot stay there too long because we get used to whatever the challenge we have. We feel bored eventually or anxious depending on the situation. So let's say you start from blue. Let's say you're at the blue dot, okay? Blue dot. You're in a bored situation. So then what are you going to do? You're going to try to basically raise your challenge level so that you get into that blue arrow, into the flow zone. But if you are there, now you're in a flow, right? Which is good. But eventually, if you stay at the same challenge level, you get used to it. You pick up, some skills and techniques about that activity again, and your skill level get higher than the challenge, and eventually you fall off of flow again, so on and so forth. And you have to try to raise your challenge level again. So this is the nature of flow. Typically, flow doesn't last like 5 hours or 10 hours. It just doesn't. Okay. Flow exists on a very delicate balance. So it's maybe even the longest, maybe couple hours. Sometimes like a 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or a few minutes sometimes even, or a few seconds even sometimes. Really micro flow exists too. But anyway, so as a practitioners, we have to know this so that we have to actually closely monitor, if you want to facilitate flow, our clients and make sure that the challenge and skill level matches in a really nice way, continuously, rather than, oh, okay, we set the challenge level for one activity, that's done. Not really. Now, this is the second model in 1980, developed in 1988. It's called a quadrant model. Okay, so what's the major difference between this one and the previous one is that the left bottom is no longer flow anymore. Okay, left bottom is not, they conducted a lot of studies, a lot of evidence, and they found that actually when people are in a left bottom, which is still balanced, right? Challenge and skills are balanced in a left bottom too, but people are now reporting great experiences at all. It's opposite, actually, one of the worst kind of experiences. So Csikszentmihalyi goes like, okay, this is different from flow. We're going to call it apathy. And it's actually one of the worst experiences. Now, the center here, the green circle, okay, is an individual average level for a particular activity. Well, sorry, individual average level for the particular activities challenge, as well as skill level. So, when I, let's say, play badminton, right? So my average performance skill for badminton, that's the bottom side. And what kind of challenge I bring typically for my badminton, depending on who I play with and things like that. That's the average point too. That determines average point too. So we have to match our skill and challenge level beyond that green spot, the center spot. Okay, this quadrant model suggests that. And we move on to the 8-channel model in 1997. And this is a model that you know from RLS 100. Okay, this model provides more detailed separation of different types of experiences. Okay, and right top still is flow, but the flow's area is getting smaller, right? Once again, flow is a PDE. It's a rare occurrence. It's not a common experience. Okay, and left bottom is still apathy. It's one of the worst experiences. So what this model suggests is that as you get away from flow, the experience basically gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and the apathy is the worst. Okay, so this suggests that arousal and control. So arousal is characterized by excitement, so it's still positive, but it's not as great as flow, according to Csikszentmihalyi, according to this model. Control is where you feel confident and control over, obviously, situation and activity because you have plenty of skills over the challenge level required, which is not a bad thing, probably, but it's not as good as flow. Now, there are important questions when it comes to the relationship between flow and leisure. Does flow happen more during leisure than in other life domains? Maybe one theory, and this is actually what the leisure scholars and some of the psychologists asked, because they thought that the freedom, especially choice freedom to do something, or freedom to choose activities you want in leisure, may facilitate the skill challenge much. Makes sense? because in leisure, you get to choose the type of activity. So arguably, you should have the best chance in terms of making that challenge skill match because you can just choose the kind of activity that gives right amount of challenge, right? In work, you can't do that because, well, boss is gonna give you no matter what, like maybe too boring, not challenging activity, or very, very too challenging activity, right? But you still have to do it. But that's not the case in leisure. Now we conducted some earlier studies, and what they found was that, however, studies show that the flow occurs during paid work as often as during leisure, if not more. Actually, some studies found that actually flow happens more in work than in leisure, earlier studies. Okay, so that was kind of disappointing for leisure scholars. Now that made sense though, because work typically has, if you think back about the conditions for flow, right? Um, Clear goals and immediate feedback. Once again, makes sense because in work, typically there are clear goals. You gotta sell, your retail. You gotta sell certain number of clothes, amount of money, for example. You have to achieve certain, amount of basically sales in each month sometimes, or let's say what else? The immediate feedback. Your boss may tell you basically how you're doing or how well you're doing, how poorly, not well you're doing, right? You're not getting into that situation, but there's immediate feedback typically. Now, that was earlier study. A more recent study found that, however, when these two people and Engesser, I don't know, and Bauman, they divided leisure, which is such a broad category, into subcategory based on the activity types. And they found that the people experience flow in sports/exercise and creative activities more often than in core work, which is the primary tasks in your job, okay? So sports and exercise makes sense, isn't it? It's often challenging. So, you can work on that skill challenge matching above, beyond the personal average quite easily, maybe. There's typically clear goals. Well, you should bring a clear goals like working out, um, how much of weight you're basically, and how many reps you're doing, things like that. You want to be this strong. You want to be able to do this heavy weight, how many reps in a couple months. You can have those goals as well. In group sports context, you may be like there's tournaments, there's competition, so you want to win first prize in those competitions, for example. Or you're working on a certain skills, like you're working on a smash, you're working on a backhand shot, and you're trying to really nail that skill. So there could be clear goals as well, and immediate feedback, right? You're working on a certain, let's say in badminton, there's a backhand shot, which is one of the trickiest shot. If you can practice that, and if you're failing, it's immediate. Like you're hitting the net, your shadow is not going over the net. That's a mistake. It's immediate feedback. You can literally see them right off the bat, right? So there's that immediate feedback as well. Creative activities like music, arts, those things, they can bring a lot of challenge, and they can bring those goals and immediate feedback as well too. So that depends on what kind of leisure we're talking about. And these researchers also found that these two types of leisure had a better emotional quality of flow than compared to work. What that means is that it's not just about quantity, which is the first bullet point. Well, actually, second from top, I guess, right? It's not just a quantity wise, flow is more in these activities compared to work, but quality wise, specifically emotion. Okay, more positive emotion, less negative emotion in the flow during these two types of leisure activity compared to flow in a work. So even the flow, there's actually different, quality level. And they also finally found that actually leisure does a very interesting stuff. So relaxing leisure, typically that doesn't lead to any flow because challenge is low, right? Then having that in the night before your workday, it actually helps you have more flow in your work the next day. Okay, so leisure may have a very more supportive indirect role to facilitate flow next day as well. So you could potentially use when you're become manager, right, to manage, your subordinates, your colleagues to perform, to help them perform better, or you can potentially apply that in the context of sports, other, maybe camp context where so program takes over time, over days. Having that relaxing leisure each night may be very important for your clients to experience flow next day in activity. So there is more nuances to the relationship between flow and leisure. And this table summarizes evidence as to how frequently people experience flow across different types of leisure activity. Okay. So as you see, like we discussed in the last slide, games and sports, and hobbies, creative activities are characterized by flow quite a bit. 44% of the time for games and sports, 34% of the time for hobbies. And as a person who played games as well as sports recently, over the past several years, I definitely agree. Gaming, especially, is such a flow generator. There's so much actually research going into the gaming and flow and how we can actually harness that, synergy basically. Now, other types of leisure activity like socialization, thinking, listening to music, watching TV, they're more characterized by boredom, apathy, that type of experiences compared to flow. Okay, so that depending on what type of leisure. Now, the question is, and I want you to really think about this question, is flow really the best experience? Like Csikszentmihalyi said, it's a good experience. It's a really good experience. Nonetheless, is that the best? Because that was pretty much what Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, psychologist, said, assumed, and hoped during his career. But it could be one of those things, to be honest, that researchers sometimes found this great phenomena that we can dedicate our research and our life, our work, career to. And we think that everything about them is great. And then we think we assume, well, we have this rosy eyes, basically, that flow is great. So that was for him, for Csikszentmihalyi, that was flow. But we have to be, as practitioners and their future practitioners and applied researcher, we have to critically think, is this really that great as much as he thinks? There are actually quite a bit of counter evidence. For example, in leisure studies, Heo and colleagues, they conducted an experience sampling method, and they found that actually flow was negatively correlated to positive emotions among older adults. So more flow, less positive emotions among older adults. That sounds like not really the best. Moneta, psychologists, found that actually among Chinese students, they felt actually higher level of intrinsic motivation. Typically, intrinsic motivation is better, good thing. So more of that, more of a good thing during low challenge, high skill situation, which is not flow channel, if you remember that model, okay? Flow is high challenge, high skill. Okay, so Chinese students felt their highest level of intrinsic motivation, low challenge, high skill. And that was bigger than more than the how much of the amount of intrinsic motivation they felt in high skill, high challenge, the flow situation, basically. Now, thinking about these studies and these results, that raises questions regarding the generalizability of flow and the flow as the quote unquote the best experience. Is it really best for everybody? It may not be. First of all, according to the Hill and colleagues study, according to, well, across age groups, maybe, there are some groups, they may not enjoy flow as much. We could ask, do older adults want to be so challenged? Flow is challenging experience, right? Do they want to be always? Well, not always, but so often. Think about it. Think about your maybe grandparents, if they are still around, or other older adults you know. Do they want to be so challenged? Maybe not. Relaxation is a good thing, right? But some of the older adults, yes. There are some amazing older adults out there who, I don't know, weight lift or gosh, ultramarathon and those people are out there, but there are more outliers, there are more exceptions, right? Across cultures, based on a monitored study, do collectivistic people, people who belong to collectivistic culture like a China, do they want to be challenged so often? And here's the reason why. In a collectivistic culture based on harmony, relationship, and social status more, what happened is that the idea of losing face, your status, other people's judgment of you is actually more threatening, more important. That carries more weight in your relationship building and their success, basically, in society, basically, compared to more individualistic society like North America. Here you can say, well, just mind your business. I don't care about what other people thinks and just focus on yourself, right? That's not how it works typically in a collectivistic cultures. In that situation, challenging situation can lead to, of course, failures. And failures can lead to losing face, that basically other people's judgment and their, social status being challenged and so on and so forth. So actually that leads to some bigger problems in collectivistic culture too. The stakes are high, if you will, over there than here, depending on activity. So maybe they rather prefer low challenge situation. That's what we observed. And anybody else, any other group that you can think about who may actually not like flow, right? So I don't want you to be those practitioners who just only know and who just love flow, because there are many other positive experiences as well. There are some problems with the flow as well. Another problem and the criticism against flow is that can flow be actually addictive, right? In RLS 100, we already kind of talked about it. Some of us just, some of you mentioned that too, potentially. And there is actually emerging quite a bit of evidence around that. And obviously, if flow is so addictive, that's not best. It's actually, very tricky experience we have to better navigate. And one of the great research area right now where this, flow and addiction is actually examined is gaming. And gaming is arguably one of the booming, esports and I don't know, if you're going to be parents, if you're ever going to be parents, have a kids, right? Your kid's going to most likely do some video gaming. And if video game leads to flow, flow leads to addiction, this is something that you really want to know. Now, Wu and colleagues, their research found specialized and committed MMORPG players, so massively multi-online role-playing games such as, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy 14. There's like a couple other many other titles actually coming out too. These people tended to experience flow more and they become addicted to the games as well. Specialized and committed MMORPG players. So there's that link between flow and addiction. These researchers speculated that this link between the flow and their gaming and addiction, why not? Why not? This might have been because especially specialized gamers lacked skills in enjoying other activities. We're going to talk about what we mean by specialization or recreation specialization later on in this chapter. Which happens, right? Sometimes, you focus on one side of your life and you don't develop skills in other aspect, like socialization in person, and so on and so forth. So maybe they become heavily reliant on the game induced flow. Sorry, became this solo or only or one of the few sources of enjoyment for their life. So they just go back to it so much and basically develop addiction around it. Another research, Hall and colleagues found that among different conditions and characteristics of flow, altered sense of time. So basically you open up a game and play the game and just like 2 hours pass, 4 hours pass, the entire like waking hours pass, just like that. That correlated to greater gaming addiction. So not just the flow, what we got to really watch out for is that strong absorption and people seems to going through that they're losing track of time, and that's very, very dangerous according to their findings. And also they found that actually they looked at the different characteristics of game, and they found that actually social nature of games, like playing the game with the voice chat, playing MMORPG, like the other study, that's by nature is a social game, basically. Using forums like Reddit and exchanging expertise and getting questions answered and so on and so forth, uh, also leads to more addiction as well. So social games, more addiction. So actually, I have to check out myself too, because I use Discord, I voice chat, MMORPG I play, I use some forums, so on and so forth. So this is dangerous territory that I'm into. So yeah, I have to look into my leisure life as well. So if you know, if this applies to you, you may want to check out too. Now, going back to Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, if I ask you, can you argue against Dr. C's Dr. Csikszentmihalyi's assertion that the flow is the key, flow is the quote unquote one of the only ways to happiness, based on some of the evidence? Maybe it is not. We talked about some counter evidence, we talked about some addiction evidence, so on and so forth. Now, have you had any experience of flow related, maybe addictive situation? You felt like something was so nicely challenging and you get a lot of skills and you were really good at it, and the time passes like so quickly, 2 hours just like felt like 5 minutes. And you might have got little addicted. I would be, very interested in what kind of activity, what kind of situation led to that. Now, another type, so I said we're going to talk about different types of PD, and the second type is called engagement. Engagement is characterized by involvement in the stories and narratives. That's very important. Story, narrative, that's the key word, okay? Now, it's similar to being lost in a story. You read a captivating, book, and it just loses track of time. You feel like traveling to another world while reading. If you remember Susan Show's study, time use diary study in chapter 4, actually her study found that actually reading a book was considered by the Canadian couple participants, as leisure, 100%. That doesn't happen often. And that probably was because many people experienced engagement during reading a good books. Because it was so captivating, engagement happened. Now, related to this idea of engagement, it's based on a Green and Brooks concept called transportation. And these people created a measurement, so survey questions. Transportation to them meant getting lost in a story and traveling to another world. We just talked about it. And they found actually 3 aspects to it too. So these are basically 3 aspects of engagement as well. Okay, so the cognitive is the first one. We can picture ourselves in the described story. The story just is in your mind. You understand it well, and you feel like you're watching a movie or you're reading a book, but you feel like you're in it too. You're really closely observing that story unfolding in front of your eyes. Emotional aspect of transportation is about you're emotionally affected by story. I don't know. To me, that's Harry Potter when I was a kid. I read one of the first English book that I actually fully read. And when some sad thing happened, I don't want to spoil for some of you who might not have read that, masterpiece, if you will. I recommend. Um, some key character die, and I might have shed a tear or not, and I don't cry. I never cry. I never really cry. So that kind of thing. Or sometimes book is too emotional that you cannot just keep reading. You have to just take a break. That much of emotional impact. Sometimes reading a story can have on us. The third aspect is called imagery. Okay. From this perspective, from this, we have a vivid, clear, concrete image of characters or things in a story, even though sometimes we don't have a picture, right? Like, for example, Harry Potter example, I read their book first a couple years before the movie came out. And I pictured about Hogwarts, the castle, the school, right? And their, what's that place called? diagonal alley that where all the markets exist, and one shop, and there the bank and all other things exist, right? I imagined those things. I had a really clear idea. And when the movie came out, it was just like what I imagined. And it was a fantastic experience too. But sometimes, people don't do a great job, or, from my perspective, at least, you imagine characters and whatnot. And then there's like TV comes out, movie come out, or anime come out, and it just doesn't look anything like it, right? Sometimes. And it basically ruins the experience. So, but imagery is a very important part of a transportation as well. Now, these are the characteristics and conditions of engagement. Now, on the left side condition, narrative and story are very, very important part. That this is the key, defining condition. Okay, you got to have a narrative or story for engagement. Now, story though isn't necessarily told in words, right? It's not necessarily book always, if you will. It could be people's actions, performance, movement. Because, for example, theater, performance, they actually tell a story through their movement, right? Sometimes it's a visual, painting, whatever, only painting, only visual. Sometimes it's music, sound, right? So those things can also tell a story too. On the right side, there are many characteristics, and many of them are actually quite similar to either flow or the other next one we're going to talk about. But these one in a red box seems to be quite unique. Feeling transported to the story's setting and event. So that's a cognitive aspect of the transportation or engagement. Deeper understanding of the story's character. That's basically the imagery part of it too. No, sorry, deeper understanding of the story character. So that's a cognitive. The first one is more of an imagery probably here. And then heightened emotional intensity here, that's the emotional aspect basically of the transportation. Now, what's important here, especially compared to flow, is that usually heightened emotional intensity here is positive, but also there is quite a bit of negative emotion involved in engagement, if you think about it. If you watch Harry Potter, there's quite a bit of, for example, fear. There's scary monsters, scary characters as well. There's quite a bit of sad moments as well, especially toward the end as well. Some of the main characters have like traumatic experience, which makes you sad as well. And of course, there's a positive moments too. So actually, stories and narratives, and good ones especially, they use negative emotions to captivate readers. So the emotional aspect of engagement is more than just feeling good and feeling present. Okay, it's often shift from negative to positive, positive to negative, so on and so forth. And that's very, captivating. That's really engaging. Now, the last PDE we want to talk about, we learned in the chapter, is absorption, which involves neither stories nor performance. So what is it about? It's rather highly relaxing, according to Gary Ellis, who is a researcher from Texas A&M. Now, absorption happens often during sensory activities that involves quite a bit of your visual, audio, textile experiences, and so on and so forth, such as nature viewing, listening to classical music. I like that actually. Classical music, I have zero training, but I love listening to it. And then probably that's why absorption is why. Absorption also happens during rhythmic, kinesthetic movement, like easy-paced walking, flat water, so still water canoeing. They're not flow because there isn't quite a bit of challenge, right? But have you felt like that's so absorptive? Like it's just you feel like time is going like really quick, or maybe even so slow in a good way, right? Those things, they're not flow. They cannot be flow. Well, they may be actually absorption. And that's it. That's why it's important to understand different types of PDE, because they are not flow, but some people only understand flow. So they're like, oh, that's flow, that's flow, that's flow. Not quite, right? By having these, knowing different types of PDE, their different conditions and different characteristics, hopefully you can facilitate it, you can plan for different kind of good experiences that fit your clientele, that fit your setting and their, your organization's missions and purpose and whatnot. Now, for as to condition for absorption, you can see on the left side, there's actually two quite a bit of actually diverging different types of absorption, if you will. So one is low intensity absorption, which is about for that internal external stimuli, whether it's the visual information, audio information, whatever, they're quite a neutral, they're quite a undemanding, they're not overwhelming. Okay, so it's pretty calming situation, really natural situation. That's the setting that comes very natural to the people. On a higher end side, those stimuli, whatever, internal, information, thoughts, feelings, external, visual cues and whatnot, they're complex and they're challenging, even they're overwhelming, almost like a little bit too much. Okay, and I'll let you know some example later. Now, on the right side, you see different types of characteristics, and the red ones are kind of important one. I'm going to go to the bottom one first. Low level, low intensity level, and high intensity level again. So the low intensity level condition leads to low intensity level characteristics, basically in attention. So you don't have to really force your attention to anything particular. You're just naturally existing, very relaxingly existing in that moment, in that setting, typically. Absence of active thinking, typically, and the heightened emotional intensity, especially relaxation. Relaxation, the deep relaxation, if you will. You're on a canoe, yourself on a still lake, surrounded by mountain, the deep relaxation. At the high intensity level, though, the characteristic is fully focused attention and how you're focusing on something, some activity, whatever. Enhanced sensory awareness that you can smell well, you can hear well, you can see well, whatever. And global thinking, like higher level thinking, higher order thinking about sometimes like, what is life about? What is it? Why does this world exist? Searching for meaning, that kind of big thinking. We tend to have in an absorptive experience. And then finally, heightened emotional intensity, and especially unique emotion called awe, which tends to happen in a high intensity absorption. We're going to talk about that more. Now, through absorption, the top one characteristic, right? Sense of self-altered. So people go into this kind of experiences, such as like whale watching, for example. I mean, whale is so big and overwhelming. People sometimes come out of that experience a little changed, more environmentally friendly, for example, or thinking about the world and life a little differently. Now, speaking of all right, absorption and awe are closely related to each other, and here are some of the emotional experience characteristics of awe. First of all, awe is related to something vast, perception of something vast, like whether it's the actually size-wise perceptually big, like a mountain is so big, whale is so big, or conceptual largeness, like for example, have you enjoyed actually learning theories and their ideas in physics, like string theory, for example, or Big Bang theory and those things? Yeah, Big Bang theory is not just a funny sitcom. Actually, there's a theory around that. Then you think about the beginning of the universe, or how the universe is actually expanding, or connecting, or all those things actually. And it's big. It's they're pursuing, those physicists, theoretical physicists, are pursuing the theory of everything, if you will. And that's a big idea. And you go like, whoa, and that vastness. And this typically leads to the second characteristics, which is a need for accommodation, because something is so big, size-wise, perceptually, or conceptually, it grows basically your frame of reference. Typically, every day, day-to-day, this small frame of reference, right? We're concerned about day-to-day small issues every day, but it really widens it. So we really have to broaden our horizons and perspective to accommodate this experience in, right? And that's the good part too. Now, time-wise, altered sense of time. Typically, you feel like time started to move slower than the clock time. And the fourth one, self-diminishment. You feel small or insignificant. Like you see well and you feel your humans are so small, but in a sometimes good way, because you feel like, you know what, I was concerned about these daily stresses and assignments and whatnot, but that's fine. World is big. There's something bigger than us. And the issues that we face are quite a bit, to be honest, small. So we're going to be fine. The fifth characteristic is connectedness, that through all, you typically feel part of something bigger than yourself, whether it's the nature or the community or group of people or the history, something like that too. For example, you're at the music concert, everybody's fan of this band. You feel like you're part of big something, you know, this fan base, whatever called. You feel like a part of something big. And a finally, physical sensations. Sometimes it's a freezing sensation. There's a goosebump. Your eyes, your pupils are kind of, dilated, widened, jaw dropping. Those things. Actually, there's a physiological responses to all as well. Very interesting emotional experience. Research shows that awe is very unique emotion. Actually, different from many other positive emotions or negative emotions, because all can be first positive or negative. Like we talked about, your frame of reference is challenged. You have to actually change your perspective. Accommodation is actually can be quite a bit uncomfortable at the very beginning, because you have to change your way of thinking, right? It could be challenging. It can be negative actually at least in the short term as well. Also can make us think. Funny thing is that actually a lot of positive emotion, happiness, excitement, relaxation actually stop us thinking. Actually, yes, it actually makes us quote unquote dumb and less attentive and everything. Yes, research actually, we did experiments, psychologists did experiments, and it shows actually a positive emotion makes our brain kind of slow down. Negative emotion actually is a fight or flight kind of thing, right? It just like makes us the snap decision. So our perspective is narrower, snap decision. Oh, it's a very unique emotion here. It actually engages us with the higher order thinking, like meaning of life, what the beginning of universe, the nature of human relationship, whatever, those big issues. All can also be exciting or calming. So the high intensity or low intensity, all can exist in a different area as well. It can be sometimes deeply relaxing or sometimes very exciting as well. O has relationship with the leisure. It happens during various leisure activities and settings, such as listening to live music, visiting a museum and seeing something historical stuff that's made thousands of years ago, using a virtual reality technology, or going on a nature trip and seeing something magnificent. My research team actually used virtual reality and to try to basically facilitate all experience as well. Now, this is the last part, I think, of this video. And we want you to be able to, once again, differentiate different type of PDE: flow, engagement, and absorption. This means not all PDEs are flow, right? We learned the different PDEs. That means not every, time altering experience is flow. And I hope you know that. And I hope that will be helpful for you as a practitioner in the future. And I want you to be able to write maybe a short leisure-based story for, each of, or maybe, each of flow, engagement, absorption, or any of them if you pick. Hopefully not flow, because we talk so much about flow, right? Maybe engagement and absorption. And clearly identifying unique characteristics and condition of those things in your story. You can make up a story, or you can use some of your personal stories to show your understanding of these concepts. And maybe because we're not in person, we're going to do for online discussion forum, so you can share it and I'll go in and take a look. So make sure that you understood these concepts well. You can use them for your future programming and marketing and potentially facilitation as well. And that will be very exciting for me. Anyway, so that was about PDE. We're going to stop here this lecture. Thank you for watching.